Not all mice are created equal. Some are more comfortable than others, some are more accurate and well-performing, and some are more reliable and durable and willing to stand the test of time to last forever! At least, so we'd hope. These are all things that we look for when purchasing a new mouse once our current one fails. Unfortunately, I was just hit with this eventuality myself, so I've recently gotten my hands on Logitech's G502, G402, and G303 mice in search of a replacement. I'm Doug Ty, and here's how I think they stack up. Let's start with the G402. Released just a couple months after the G502, it takes a more minimalistic approach, sporting a smooth, sleek, no-nonsense design that will feel right at home if you're coming from an MX518 or G400 like I am. It's rather lightweight, coming in at around 108 grams without the cable, which makes it quick to glide and easy to lift off and flick on lower sensitivities. The left and right clicks are fast and responsive. No complaints here. The thumb buttons are out of the way enough that you won't press them on accident, but they're still within close enough reach that they're quick and easy to access. The DPI shift buttons have been moved to the side of the mouse, more towards your index finger, something not found in earlier generations of Logitech mice. And there's a sniper button towards the tip of your thumb that, when held, lowers the DPI by 1 preset, allowing you to more easily make precise movements when called for. Although this probably isn't very useful if you use a low enough DPI anyway. One of the main features on the box is what they call Fusion Engine technology, which is basically an accelerometer that takes over in place of the optical sensor if you somehow manage to move the mouse faster than a certain threshold, at which the optical sensor begins to lose accuracy. The G402 uses a 3310 sensor. While more accurate at lower DPIs, it isn't so hot at moving too quickly, so the inclusion of the accelerometer is to make up for that. Personally, I couldn't move the mouse fast enough to activate this threshold unless I flicked it way harder than I would while actually playing something, but I can imagine it could be useful for players who prefer insanely low DPIs. Either way, it incurs no latency until the acceleration threshold is met, so there's no reason to worry about turning it off if you don't think you'll use it. Who knows, maybe you will. However, a selling point it is not. If you're thinking about getting this mouse, I wouldn't weigh the Fusion Engine into your decision unless you know you'll absolutely be able to make use of it. The sensor itself is capable of up to a humble and reasonable 4000 DPI, and apparently the failure threshold at which the accelerometer kicks in is somewhere around 3-point-something meters per second. This is where the Fusion Engine comes into play. With the Fusion Engine turned on, the maximum failure threshold is 500 inches per second, or 12.7 meters per second, which I don't think is even humanly possible. Also, word is that there's no inherent acceleration or pixel rounding under about 2000 DPI. Apparently there used to be some axis-dependent precision issues initially, but these have been fixed in a firmware update. My only real complaint about the G402 is the scroll wheel, which, while certainly not horribly bad, isn't that great either. Right out of the package, it'll be extremely stiff, both for scrolling as well as clicking down. In fact, it required me quite a deal of force to middle-click initially, so much so that I was tempted to return it mere minutes after unpackaging. However, I stuck with it, and after giving it some use, the wheel has loosened up, and middle-click isn't as big an issue to depress. The wheel is still a tad bit mushy for my taste, as I would prefer more defined notches while scrolling. However, I believe that too could likely get better over more use. Very occasionally, there are some responsiveness issues, where you'll feel it scroll down but it doesn't register, and sometimes middle click will produce a clicking feeling but still require additional force to actually be pressed. I almost want to think this is a result of getting a defective unit. However, the internet seems to agree with me that the wheel has a stiff tendency. Otherwise, while I'd describe the wheel as a noticeable step down from what I'm used to with my old G400, it's something that you could probably deal with and get used to if it weren't for these issues. In essence, it's a fairly average rubber scroll wheel just like you'd find in any other mouse, albeit a bit stiffer and mushier than optimal, and not without problem. If you're looking for a particularly precise scroll wheel, you might want to give this mouse a try before committing to it, as I can definitely see how this would be a deal breaker for some. Now on to the G402's bigger brother, the G502. While you get more of a basic standard design with the G402, this mouse is king if you're looking for something with features a step above what a standard mouse will give you. Similar in shape to what you're used to with Logitech mice, the G502 features some nice rubber gripping along its sides, and a bit more prominent thumb grip than on the G402, which really cradles your thumb rather than just being an indent. This could really be a turnoff for some people, especially if you claw grip. The rubber may also get your fingers somewhat sweatier after longer gaming sessions than the 402's harder plastic would. The left and right buttons have a slightly inwards bevel on their top surface, which can be rather hit or miss. Personally, I wasn't a huge fan of them, as I'd prefer to palm grip this mouse, but the indents kind of force more of a claw grip for me. Of course, your mileage may vary. You can put more weights in the bottom if you want to, but I found it to be more than heavy enough already when empty, but you do have the option to make it heavier if that's something you'd like. It comes with very similar, though more angular, backwards, forwards, DPI shift, and sniper buttons along the side, just like the G402. The sniper button may be a bit easier to reach on the G502 if that's something you'll likely be using a lot of. There's an extra profile switch button in the center that allows you to toggle between up to 3 profiles you can set in the driver software, in case you want several sets of DPI presets, but I haven't really found any use for that, as I barely shift DPI presets to begin with. All the mouse buttons use mechanical microswitches, so much like comparing a rubber dome keyboard to a mechanical keyboard, button presses have more of a satisfying click to them rather than a mushy feeling. However, how this factors into performance, if at all, is a mystery to me. What really makes this mouse stand out to me is the scroll wheel, which they've obviously put a lot of thought and effort into making. If you're a fan of the G500's free scrolling mode, you'll be happy to know that it's made a return, and you can push a button behind the wheel to conveniently toggle frictionless scrolling on and off. I'm sure many people will see this as just a gimmick, but I can say from experience that this is extremely useful while working with really long code files, PDFs, or just browsing Reddit in general. You can also push the wheel to its sides for horizontal scrolling, something that not many documents will ever really have, but it's nice for coding with word wrap-off. The wheel itself is made of a heavier metal not commonly found on scroll wheels, which gives it rather deep notches to click into every scroll, making for the most satisfying and precise scrolling on any mouse I've ever used. While this is an absolute joy to use once you get used to it, I won't deny that I wasn't a huge fan of it at first. I'm used to needing to very aggressively flick my scroll wheels, as all of my prior mice have had the standard stiff rubberized kind of wheel that usually takes quite a deal of force to move at any reasonable speed. When I first started using the G502 scroll wheel, the smoothness and inertia behind each flick really threw me off, and I would wind up flicking it way too hard and causing it to keep going for a notch or two after letting it go. However, after spending some time to get used to it, I've grown to absolutely love this scroll wheel. Switching weapons in games like Killing Floor 2, CSGO, and especially Grand Theft Auto 5 with its weapon wheel is extremely precise, and I find I never really over or undershoot what I'm trying to select, as each notch gives a heavy ka-chunk feeling, so I know exactly how many notches I've scrolled past. The G502 introduces a new Logitech exclusive optical sensor to the market, the 3366, maxing out at a ridiculous yet arousing 12,000 DPI. I can't imagine anyone actually using that high a DPI, but that's the sensor's native DPI, and it's certainly there if you're insane enough to use it. It's supposed to have absolutely no inherent acceleration at any DPI, and the failure threshold is 300 inches per second, or 7.62 meters per second, which is pretty high even for pro gamers. Most hands will have a seriously hard time achieving this, so it's perfectly within reason to me. Additionally, do not forget about the braided cable. It's really not something to overlook, as initially I was indifferent. You really don't know what you're missing until you finally use a mouse that has one. It's very light and never gets in the way. You never feel any kind of tension, force, or pressure coming from it, affecting your aim, and it tends to not get tangled or sharply bent, something that, without a doubt, has killed many a mouse in the past. This leads me to believe that the G502 may last a little bit longer than other mice. However, there may be a slight problem with the mouse feet. Due to the way that they're positioned and angled on the bottom of the mouse, many users are reporting that they need to be replaced way more often than on other mice. As the G402 and G303 were released after the G502, they seem to have fixed this problem. My main qualm with this mouse is its weight. While the G402 was 108 grams, the G502 is around 121 grams minimum, without adding any weights to it. While that doesn't sound like a whole lot more on paper, you can certainly feel the difference side by side, and I found my target acquisition in shooters to be a bit snappier with the lighter G402. However, weight is something I feel I can likely get more used to over time, so whether this is much of a concern for you is up to personal preference. Speaking of weight and personal preference, after having the 402 and 502 side by side and switching between the two for a while, it became apparent to me how much I value a lighter weight in a mouse. So, finally, I decided to give the G303 a try. Whereas the G402, sharing a similar shape, can be described as a lighter G502, the G303 is in a class of its own. It's super light at 87 grams, and you can see Logitech literally cut corners to get this weight down, but not in a bad way. That's the one thing about this mouse. the shape. Sporting a kite shield-inspired design, it might instantly pose a comfortability issue for some people, and that's perfectly understandable. It has a weird and unique diamond-like shape that I don't think any other mouse really has. It's definitely smaller than its brothers, and having somewhat longish fingers, you'd think that would create a problem for me. However, due to my hybrid palm and claw grip, surprisingly, I'm finding it quite comfortable. The corners of the diamond are right where I place my thumb and ring fingers, offering me control over the mouse despite not much of my palm actually being in contact with it. For someone with a pure palm grip, however, I don't think you'll get along with this shape very well, but if your local mouse dealer happens to have it on display, it's definitely worth a try before deciding. It's even more minimalistic than the G402, with no separate up or down DPI shift buttons, but a single button in the center to cycle through them instead. If you like to have more than 2 DPI settings, this may be a bit awkward, as there's no LED indicators for what setting you're currently on, like the G402 and G502 have. There's also no sniper button, but I doubt that's something many people will be crying over. The back and forwards buttons are more flat and discreet, and while I'm not crazy about how the forwards button is thinner and a bit harder to reach, they're both perfectly fine to me. It has a similar looking rubber wheel to the G402, however this one I found was much smoother to scroll while not sacrificing distinct notches for precision, and clicking it down is very responsive, requiring much less force to register. The left and right mouse buttons are extremely responsive and satisfying, as Logitech is doing something very unique here by adding springs underneath each button. I don't think any other mouse on the market is currently doing this. While this may not come to huge benefit in an FPS, spam clicking becomes increasingly more effortless in an RTS or MOBA. With the same Logitech exclusive optical sensor as the G502, you should have absolutely no acceleration or speed related malfunction issues with this mouse. It also has a braided cable, which is just as light and bendy and out of the way as the G502's. It comes with a customizable RGB LED, which I've never really been a fan of, having distracting lights at the corner of my eyes, but as far as LED lights go, this is honestly pretty cool looking. I'm tempted to leave it on. It may have converted me to the light side. The real star of this mouse is its weight. At 87 grams, this is the lightest mouse Logitech offers, and while it may take a bit to get used to, its effect is already showing on me. I'm finding aiming to be increasingly more effortless than with the G402, and my hand/wrist/arm area is under a lot less strain over extended gaming sessions. Seriously, this thing just flies across the mousepad. The only caveat is its shape, but if you can get past this, it's pure bliss to play with. Now, you might go to the store and see an identical looking G302 for a bit cheaper. The G303 is a direct upgrade to this, main differences being the braided cable, the new sensor, color LEDs, and 2 new mouse feet on the sides. I don't have one to show you, but apparently with certain grips the G302 had a problem where, since there were only feet at the front and back of the mouse, it had a tendency to wobble to the sides. The G303 fixes this, so no need to worry about that anymore. But if you don't really care about these additions and would instead prefer to get the same shape, weight, and spring tension buttons at a lower price, you can go ahead with the G302. However, personally, I think what the G303 brings to the table is more than worth it. The mice share the same Logitech gaming software drivers. It's pretty straightforward. You can change what each button is bound to on the main page. Different buttons, keys, even pre-recorded multi-key macros are game. You can change the DPI presets and polling rate here as well, although I really don't know why you'd want to have the polling rate any lower than the maximum. Although undocumented, it's worth noting that the G502 and 303 use DPI increments of 50, while the G402 uses increments of 80. Additionally, due to its weight, the G502 produces slightly more friction on your mousepad, and will require your settings to be about 100 DPI higher than those on the G402 to feel approximately the same, at least for my testing. As the G303 is lighter and produces less friction, you'll likely need to lower the DPI for it to feel about the same, but I haven't found an approximate measurement for this as of yet. Not a fan of extremely bright and distracting LED lights on your peripherals? Nocturnal gamers can turn the LED brightness down or even completely off. There's an even more distracting breathing effect that can be enabled as well if you so desire. With the G303, there's also a neat color cycle effect, and you can turn off the logo or side LEDs separately. Settings can be stored on your hard drive or in the mouse's onboard memory for ease of portability. A driver feature exclusive to the new sensor found in the 502 and 303 is the ability to calibrate your mouse's sensor to whatever surface you'll be using it on. This is supposed to make the sensor more accurate for use on that specific mousepad or desk, but I found rather the opposite in my experience. At factory default settings, it performs much how you'd expect it to, and while tuning the sensor to my mousepad made the mice feel maybe a little bit snappier, they also became a bit too unpredictable for my taste, as running the calibration process multiple times in a row gave me wildly varying results. This wouldn't be such an issue if it would tell me what variables it was changing, display the results of the automatic calibration process, and allow me to manually set their values myself, but the whole black box, irreproducible nature of this tuning process leaves an incredibly bad taste in my mouth. However, like I said, factory default settings feel just fine, and being absolutely constant and predictable, there's really no reason at all to use anything different. It's worth a try, but I wouldn't get my hopes up. Fair warning though, at the time of this review, many users are complaining about tracking issues while using custom settings, and returning to the factory default setting appears to be the solution, at least until a firmware update comes out. Additionally, using anything but the factory default setting lowers the liftoff distance, which could result in an awkward feeling mouse if you're not aware of it. For the G402, you have access to the Fusion engine page, but all that really lets you do is turn it on and off, and as discussed before, there's really no reason not to have it on, as it doesn't introduce any more latency or anything unless you're moving the mouse fast enough for it to be used, in which case you'll probably want it on anyway. You can play around a bit and measure how fast you can make the mouse go on the screen as well, but it serves no real functionality. Your high scores can be tweeted for that oh-so-necessary social media integration. I've been using these drivers for a couple years now on previous mice, and have had no problems with it. No crashing, no freezing, no instabilities whatsoever. I'm pretty sure you don't need to have it open in the background at all times, but it takes up so little RAM and absolutely zero CPU usage. As far as driver experiences go, this one is pretty smooth. So, what's the verdict then? Well, that's up to you. When it comes down to it, it's still all about personal preference. If you prefer a heavier scroll wheel with free scroll capabilities and or a heavier mouse, then the G502 is probably a safe bet. If you like an extremely lightweight mouse with no frills and especially responsive clicks, then look no further than the G303. If you're looking for more of a middle ground with a medium weight, more buttons, and perhaps a more familiar shape, then the G402 is likely for you. Keep in mind though that it's currently the only one of the three with no braided cable, which is definitely a shame. Maybe there's hope for a G403 in the future. At the end of the day, pick whichever you find most comfortable. As a certain Sergio Forel once said, a mouse should not be just a tool, but an extension of your hand. Or something like that. Either way, it's not a choice to be taken lightly or in haste. Don't choose poorly. Well then, I suppose that concludes my tandem review on the G402, G502, and G303. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it helps narrow things down if you're as indecisive as I was about them. Personally, I've settled on the G303 as I've found out I really appreciate a lightweight mouse, and its simplicity and elegance is certainly attractive. Its satisfying clicks and just right scroll wheel just perfectly seal the deal for me. If you happen to pick one of these up, I'd be very interested to know which one you decided on and what you think of it in the comments below. I'm still Doug Ty. Thanks for watching. Not all mice are created equal. Some are more comfortable than others, some are more accurate and well-performing, and some are more reliable and durable and willing to stand the test of time to last forever! At least, so we'd hope. These are all things that we look for when purchasing a new mouse once our current one fails. Unfortunately, I was just hit with this eventuality myself, so I've recently gotten my hands on Logitech's G502, G402, and G303 mice in search of a replacement. I'm Doug Ty, and here's how I think they stack up. Let's start with the G402. Released just a couple months after the G502, it takes a more minimalistic approach, sporting a smooth, sleek, no-nonsense design that will feel right at home if you're coming from an MX518 or G400 like I am. It's rather lightweight, coming in at around 108 grams without the cable, which makes it quick to glide and easy to lift off and flick on lower sensitivities. The left and right clicks are fast and responsive. No complaints here. The thumb buttons are out of the way enough that you won't press them on accident, but they're still within close enough reach that they're quick and easy to access. The DPI shift buttons have been moved to the side of the mouse, more towards your index finger, something not found in earlier generations of Logitech mice. And there's a sniper button towards the tip of your thumb that, when held, lowers the DPI by 1 preset, allowing you to more easily make precise movements when called for. Although this probably isn't very useful if you use a low enough DPI anyway. One of the main features on the box is what they call fusion engine technology, which is basically an accelerometer that takes over in place of the optical sensor if you somehow manage to move the mouse faster than a certain threshold, at which the optical sensor begins to lose accuracy.